I'm glad you brought him up because
yeah.
he was a close second for me.
Oh.
Right here.
Hopping in now to one of my favorite parts of the draft kit. We just keep, John Credit is a good friend of the team, or a good member of the team, good friend of us, and he put together this risk assessor last year. If you looked at the risk assessor, we talked about Darius Geis. We talked about some players in there that could have, burned you if you went with them because they were super risky. And lo and behold, Darius Geis, I guess it wasn't that big far of a reach to say that Darius Geis was risky, but that was one of the names that stuck out from last year. This year, Johnny, looking at the risk assessor, I've just been so impressed with what we've got going on here, because now we've got this downside risk versus upside opportunity that's calculated within the total risk here. And some of these names that have popped out are kind of impressive, kind of worrisome, kind of, you're kind of looking at it, you're like, oh, I really like that guy. One of them that stuck out to me was Miles Sanders. We've talked about Miles Sanders. We've talked about maybe the risk that he would not get to 250 total touches as an RB1, but you're having to take him as such. I think that he gets there, but like our risk assessor has him as one of the higher risks at 38%, but one of the higher upside opportunities with 20%, 20.7%. So meaning, is the risk, no risk it, no biscuit, as Bruce Arians would say. In Miles Sanders' case, I think if you're looking at running backs that are risky, you could get a lot riskier without upside than Miles Sanders. And for me, Miles Sanders is one of my favorite players to be drafting this year, just because I think he's got that league winning upside.
I like this draft kit, putting it together. As we do that, you start to see some of these pieces really start following, and some of these players, you really start following their storyline a little bit closer than others, obviously. And one of those players is Miles Sanders that I've been kind of following along, because I want to truly see what his actual value is, because we're getting a lot of questions on him. And rightfully so, and we've had a lot of debates on the show about Miles Sanders, and I think you're right. Miles Sanders is definitely risky. You see it, but as you continue to work through these different pieces of our draft kit, and that's why it's really cool that there are so many different ways you can view a player, and then you can make your own assessment on whatever player you want to. And Miles Sanders is that guy, and he ends up checking, at the end of the day, off a lot of the boxes that I have when I'm looking at a fantasy player and whether or not he's worth it. And Miles Sanders, to be honest, at the end of the day, does check off the boxes. So I am a fan. I am willing to invest the capital needed to take Miles Sanders. I still am a fan of Boston Scott. But yeah, I think Miles Sanders is a great person to point out on this. Travis, the other person that I want to talk about here is Will Fuller, man.
I'm glad you brought him up, because he was a close second for me.
Man. So Will Fuller, we got him as a 35% risky player, which is one of the highest on this list. There are some higher, but he is definitely one of the highest. But yet you look at the upside, Travis, and he is also one of the highest on the upside with 20% upside. And I have to agree here, after doing all of his profiles, after breaking down everything, part of it is me just hoping.
But how is Will Fuller's upside not a top 5 wide receiver? I mean, it's baked. The numbers are saying it here. We've seen it when he's paired with Deshaun Watson. I have to agree with you, Johnny. I think he's one of the most, perplexing players to put your value on this year. But like, honestly, he's kind of worth that risk, man. Like, especially if you build your roster out with a couple other wide receivers before him, you're going to be sitting there, pretty looking at Will Fuller as your second, third option.
Well, and then on top of that, like, every year you talk about the injury and is that baked into where he's going, and it's like he always goes around this area, 7th, 8th round of drafts. So we haven't even, like, the fantasy community hasn't caught up to the fact that Will Fuller legitimately could be a wide receiver 1 for one of the most potent offense and one of the most potent quarterbacks in fantasy football. So it's like, if people catch up to that, like, if you started to say that Will Fuller was going in the 4th or 5th, because people were like, oh, he is a wide receiver one, and if he does put it together and stay healthy, then it's like, okay, I can understand, and it would scare me off a little bit more from Will Fuller. But like a 7th or 8th round draft capital and Will Fuller right now is
going firmly at the 803 right now in 12-team leagues.
Yeah,
as the wide receiver 34, could easily be your third wide receiver or second wide receiver you draft. And man, could that be a league winner right there if he could put, hell, if he even puts 12 games together for you, Johnny, you're going to be pretty happy with that this year. I think he puts up close to wide receiver one numbers.
I'm just saying, based on what we've, everything that I've seen and all the mock drafts we've done and everything, you could honestly go, if you wanted to go the route of the early quarterback, and you went, Pat Mahomes or Lamar, if you went running back in the first, and then 3rd through 5th round, you went running back as well, and you would grab Lamar or Pat Mahomes in the 2nd, and then you went and grabbed a Will Fuller, and you grabbed a Christian Kirk, and then you grabbed another more solid wide receiver in the second half, like Terry McLaurin maybe in the 5th, instead of getting a running back in the 5th round. Like, you could build a really nice team out that way this year, unlike a lot of past years, I think. And
I know we talk about how wide receiver is deep every year, but what this Risk Assessor is showing me, what the profiles that we'll get into have shown me, building this draft kit for Whisper Nation has shown me, is you get to this point in the draft where I think it's like wide receiver 15 through 24, or through 34, 36. There's a lot of good value there. There's a lot of good wide receivers in that window. And we talk about that's still kind of within the sweet spot of league winning wide receivers and where you want them to be, because you want them to be before 6-7 rounds. So you've got some real value in there. I'm really excited to bring Whisper Nation this draft kit, but we could talk all day on the Risk Assessor, but then everybody would know what's in it. So why don't we move on here? But you can get, of course, the Risk Assessor in our 2020 draft kit over at thefantasywhispers.com. So go on over there today and check it out. Oh, actually, Chelsea, did you have anybody you wanted to bring up in the Risk Assessor?
Well, it's funny. I pulled out Miles Sanders right away. I was trying to, scratching my head.
You just have eyes for Miles Sanders.
I so do. And when I see that he's got a 38% risk factor to him, it's a little bit troublesome. It's like, is this a Doug Peterson thing? Are you just trying to provoke me? Like, what's going on here? But the reality with the Risk Assessor, and I think the big point is, like, there is so many numbers and so much data that is fueling this Risk Assessor. So it's really exciting as somebody who lives behind the glass, right? Like, to actually dig behind the scene and what's happening here and understand how you're coming up with this. It was really exciting to see all that. So yeah, it's a tool that I'll be leaning on in this draft for sure.
Heck yeah. It's amazing. You can get almost inundated with the numbers, but we've broken it down in such a way, put some pretty colors on there. So that's always nice to help you kind of digest that data, which is always good.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.